Welcome to Friends and Fiction. 4 New York Times bestselling authors, endless stories. Novelists Mary Kay Andrews, Kristin Harmel, Kristy Woodson Harvey, and Patti Callahan Henry are 4 longtime friends with more than 70 published books between them. Together, they host Friends and Fiction, with author interviews and fascinating insider talk about publishing and writing, to highlight and support independent bookstores. They discuss the books they've written, the books they're reading now, and the art of storytelling. If you love books and you're curious about the writing world, you're in the right place.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Friends and Fiction Show. I'm Mary Kay Andrews.
And I'm Patti Callahan Henry.
And this is Friends and Fiction, 4 New York Times bestselling authors, endless stories to support indie bookstores, authors, readers like you, and of course, our librarians.
So if you're not with us already, we hope you'll join our Facebook group, which is more than 300,000 members strong. We'd also like to invite you to follow us on Instagram and YouTube. And always a reminder to subscribe to our Substack newsletter, which is full of awesome bonus content. You can find out more about us and our community and everything we have to offer at friendsandfiction.com.
On this episode, we're so excited to welcome Ace Atkins to discuss his new novel, Everybody Wants to Rule the World, which was just released on December 2nd. Okay, let's tell you about Ace before we bring him on. He is an award-winning New York Times bestselling author of more than 30 novels and numerous short stories.
A former Auburn College football player, War Damn Eagle, and a newspaper reporter. He's a recipient of the Richard Wright Literary Excellence Award, the Harper Lee Award, which we share together. I mean, we didn't win it the same year, but we both have the Harper Lee Award, and a member of the Alabama Writers Hall of Fame. He lives with his wife, Angela, and 2 children in Oxford, Mississippi. His new novel, Everybody Wants to Rule the World, which makes me want to break out in song. It's a tears song, was just released on December 2nd, and it is set in 1985. It follows 14-year-old Peter Bennett, who is convinced that his mom's new boyfriend is a Russian spy and agent.
Alan, could you please bring Ace on?
Hey, guys.
Hey, Ace, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me.
It's our entire pleasure. Okay, so Everybody Wants to Rule the World is indeed about 14-year-old Peter, who may or may not be imagining his mother's boyfriend, Gary Powers, is a Russian spy. Okay, Ace, was that a deliberate Easter egg?
It was. In fact, somebody who was reading the manuscript early, they said, "You do know who Gary Powers was?" And I said, "Yeah, it's specific. He was the famous American U-2 pilot that was shot down over the Soviet Union. There was a basis for the film Bridge of Spies. But yes, there is it pays off later on."
Okay. Yeah. Just wanted to make sure about that. And of course, you know, I am old enough that I remembered the name, and I thought, I'm going to have to look it up. Do you know that he died in a helicopter crash?
I didn't know that. It's one of those things when you're writing that, you get off on those rabbit holes and you start wanting to write about that and tell that particular story. But yeah, he was working for a TV station or something like that.
He was a traffic reporter and his in LA and the copter crash tragically.
But that was a massive deal. But in the 80s, I think maybe some people had forgotten about Gary Powers.
Yeah, I'm sure. Okay, so, Gary Powers, and then you're talking about a time period when we're under the Red Scare, just before the epic Reagan-Gorbachev meeting. And this book is inhabited by so many fascinating, funny, and hard-boiled characters. I love Peter and how angsty he is. And of course, there's so much more. What would you say? It's funny, it's hard-boiled. What would you add to that? And in true Friends and Fiction style, what would you say this book is really about?
What is this book really about? That book is a tough question, right off the bat.
I know, that's why we ask it, to put you on the spot.
Just hit it off the tee.
I think this book, right or wrong, my answer right now, it's about family. It really is about what is your family, and what are blood relations, or what are the families that you make on your own. But it's a really probably the most true or biographical novel that I've ever written. This is my 31st, 32nd book. And there's more of me and my experiences in this book than anything I've written. And so much of it, I mean, is true. This world, and Mary Kay, you know this because you were there in Atlanta at this time. I don't know if you were at the Atlanta Constitution, but
I was.
You were. And so you remember this grand time to be in Atlanta, I think. I just loved it. And that's for me, what I wanted to do was, you guys didn't ask me, but I'll tell you, what I wanted to do was recreate that world of mid-'80s Atlanta.
Yeah, well, you did a great job, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But I think Patti has a good question for you.
So, Ace, your work, 32 novels, holy moly, my friend. So your work often blends fiction with real world events, which you've done here in a new way inside this novel. I want to know where the original idea came from. Was there a spark you can point to? Was it a whole bunch of things that added up? What was the actual first moment you thought, this is a novel?
I think back in the mid-'80s, I was living in Atlanta at the time, or living outside Atlanta. I was living in the suburbs in Marietta. This is the time I was 14, 15 years old when I really became obsessed with reading and when I really got to be into books. And the mid-'80s, the bestseller lists were dominated by spy books and by espionage stories and Robert Ludlum, Frederick Forsyth, Tom Clancy, all this stuff. And of course, the James Bond stuff was still very, very big. But I went back and I read a lot of the Atlanta Constitution from 1985, which is, again, a very pivotal year for me. And spies were everywhere. They were on our nightly news. They were on NBC and all the top three, dominating the headlines. There was a new guy coming in named Mikhail Gorbachev. Who's this guy? Is he evil? Is he a bad guy? How is he going to think? And little did we know it was going to change everything. Little did we know that he was going to be open to reforms in his country. And Reagan was calling the Soviet Union the evil empire. And then we had this thing that was about an Atlanta Constitution every day, talking about the Star Wars program that was this grid across America of laser beams that, never really was going to work, but people thought it maybe could work. So this was all in my subconscious. This is the world that I'm living in as a 14, 15-year-old. I kept on thinking as a young writer, when am I going to write that Southern book about growing up in, the rural South and, my old hound dog and coming into the shotgun house where I lived with my family, whatever. That's not my story. That was my dad's story. That's the way my dad grew up. But I was not set to write that story because that's not the way I lived in the South at that time. My dad was a son of a sharecropper and moonshiner and all that stuff, but I grew up in suburban Atlanta. And I watched MTV and I went to Lenox Square and Perimeter Mall and all that kind of stuff. So, long way of answering your question, this is when I started thinking about kind of a Walter Mitty existence of, when I would go to the mall, I would think, are there Russian spies here? Is there a dead drop happening? And not in a crazy way, this sounds crazy, is somebody following me? And I was just playing games, but I think, what if somebody's following me and I've got to lose a tail? And anyone who's ever been to Lenox Square in Atlanta, it is
1,000 times. Yeah.
I think it's a little bit more streamlined now, but back then it was all just disjointed and there were hidden pockets and tunnels that would go beneath the mall. And there were offices under there that people didn't even know about. And there was definitely just stuff that you would think about could be in a spy novel. So this was really probably the first story that I told myself, stories that I made up about being followed by KGB agents, about witnessing something that was going on. So, the old adage of write what you know has never really been my thing. I usually write, as I later became a newspaper reporter, I write what I learn about. I write what interests me. I write about things that I do research on. But this was, there was not, other than the KGB, FBI stuff, this was really my life. This was the world that I lived in. And for the setting, I didn't have to do a lot.
You had the wild imagination of a writer, even as a kid. I just love that. I would love to line up a whole bunch of authors and say, who of us made up stories in our heads while we're going about our everyday life? Because not everybody does that. Some people just go to the mall without thinking a KGB spy is in there, right?
It maybe it's a little nuts. I mean, it is a little
No,
nuts.
it's not nuts. It's fantastic.
But I did,
Yeah.
in movies at this time, and in movies like War Games and Goonies were out, and
Yeah.
kids were always getting in adventures, and it wasn't unusual to be away from your parents and ending up somewhere in downtown Atlanta at the Omni and getting into trouble, and all that stuff was just fascinating to me. But yeah, I never thought about it. That's just the way I always was. But I really was into books, and I really used to go to. There's a great bookstore. Again, going back to Mary Kay with the Atlanta connection, with the old Oxford bookstore and the wonderful Oxford 2 bookstore, which I loved even more, which was the secondhand shop. They got Peachtree. And I used to go there all the time and just get boxes of books, and I loved it. I knew from that age, I didn't know what it meant to become a writer. And I'm sure we all run into that. People like, hey, I've written a story, or I want to write a book, and they don't realize how hard it is and how long it takes, and all the steps you have to go through to train to be able to become an author, hopefully. That was for me. I knew at that age that's what I wanted to do.
You were talking about thinking Russian spies were following you. When I was a little kid growing up on the south side of St. Pete, everybody in our neighborhood had lots of kids, and there was a family that had no kids. And so we were convinced they were Russian spies. So my sisters and I were running surveillance on them.
And they could have been. I mean, they really could have been.
I don't know.
When I find out later, there's a terrific writer, former FBI agent, a guy named Frank Figliuzzi, and you may have seen him. He's on CNN. And Frank is really a voice of reason in this crazy time that we're living in. He used to be the second in command of counterintelligence, the FBI, lifetime FBI agent. And Frank and I got to be friends at a book conference, and he's just an amazing speaker and really a guy I would say for anyone to follow online. But Frank was a FBI agent in the 80s in Atlanta, and he was working counterintelligence. And we started talking about, mainly part of the fun of the book in 1985 is we're talking pre-computer, pre-cell phone, GPS tracker, all that stuff, internet. You're working in a much different way. And so Frank really helped me with the character Sylvia Weaver, being able to work as an agent of that time. But I asked him, I said, Frank, were there KGB agents working in Atlanta at that time? And he said, yes. He said, I can't tell you everything. But you think about it, Lockheed is there, all the defense contractors are
Dobbins.
there.
Dobbins is there.
Air Force Base, which plays a major role in my book.
Yeah.
He said that the funny thing about the Soviets, he would give me little anecdotes. And Frank, he knows what's classified, what he can tell me and can't tell me. He said that the funny thing about the Soviets is that they were always going from DC to Disney World. They always wanted to go to Disney World, but somehow they never would fly. They didn't like to fly. And because the joke was that they would come through Atlanta, and that's where they would have meetings with the other Soviets that were working in Atlanta to hand off information. And part of Frank's job was to do what they called it a bump and smile campaign, where they would just bump into the KGB agents and say, "Oh, Yuri, welcome to Atlanta. I hope you're having a nice stay at the Hyatt. Is everything going well for you?" Just to let the agents know that they were being watched. So
that's hilarious.
Part of the imagination I had going on is that it really was happening.
Yeah. You're so known for developing character-driven stories. Tell us about Peter. It's his freshman year of high school, and he's got all the angst. I mean, Ace, I have to ask you, did your mother take off and leave you home alone?
No, but I wish she had. My mom was pretty serious about watching me and knowing where I was, but very different from a parent at that time. She was very different than a lot of my friends' mothers. A lot of my friends had parents that were checked out. They were very much parents that were still living that 70s lifestyle and going out and going to the limelight and partying or whatever they were into. A lot of the parents I knew, they were divorced, a lot of latchkey kids. So that's really the character for Peter. There's a lot about Peter that is me. His taste in music, his taste in movies and books and that kind of thing. But he really was his lifestyle was some of the latchkey kids that I knew growing up that lived in my neighborhood, where they were just left alone until, late. And then, it wasn't unusual to say, "Hey, Mom, we're going out on a Friday night. I'll be home at midnight." Okay. All right. And then, the van pulls up with the weed smoke pouring out, and the van door opens, and you go in, and, you end up downtown Atlanta somewhere. I mean, it wasn't bad parenting. That's just how things, that's how things work. It was funny when I started writing this book, though, Mary Kay, is that somebody in the business end of the publishing end was not my editor, but somebody else really said, I don't want you, I don't write this character as a 14-year-old. Why don't you write this kid as 17 or 18-year-old? I feel like writing about a 14-year-old is problematic, and it's going to have this, whatever. And I thought, that was the dumbest piece of advice I ever got, because the whole point of Peter being 14 is he has to get rides from people. He has to use his instincts to be able to, how do I get here to there? He is an investigator. He is working, almost like a private eye, but he's a private eye without a car. And he's a private eye without being an adult, where he can't get into things. So he has to really use his wits.
All right, tell us where Dennis Hotchner, the Pulp Fiction guy, where did he come from?
Did you ever come across a crime writer named Ralph Dennis? Does that mean anything to you?
No, I don't think so.
Okay,
and I was a crime writer, so I would think
this was well before you.
Don't be so sure.
But you guys inhabited the same world and would have been writing about the same place with the city of Atlanta. And Ralph published 10, 11 books for this popular library, which mainly was an imprint for men's fiction, which you don't really see anymore, because as we know, men do not read books. I think there's maybe 2 in the United States that read books. But back then, the books for men, and so you had the covers, and he published a book called Atlanta Death Watch, and on the cover there's a guy with a gun, and there's a woman in a nightie, and there's the bad guy coming in, and this real pulpy stuff. And the thing about it, they were the kind of books that were numbered, so you actually had the number on the spine, and he went through it. So they're really great pieces of time travel of Atlanta in the 70s, because it's like old underground Atlanta. It's was the signs, the old bars in it. There's all these locations that are long since dead that he writes about. He was really kind of like the Robert Parker of Atlanta.
Right.
And he didn't really get the respect that he was due, because I think in the way the books were published, he was actually a very educated man. He had a master's in theater from the University of North Carolina. He was very polished, very well read, very literate man. So even though he was writing towards a market, he could not help be a great writer, So he's really been forgotten. But anyway, what I found out years later is when I was hanging out at Oxford 2 bookstore, and I was trading in my books and I was getting stuff, Dennis Hotchner, or Ralph Dennis, had stopped publishing at that time. He hadn't published a book in about 10 years. He had really become a pretty severe alcoholic, and he was stocking books and working at Oxford 2. So at some point, I came across the real Dennis Hotchner, Ralph Dennis, when I was a kid, and I didn't know it. And I didn't, not until years later did I find out about the work of Ralph Dennis and what a terrific writer he was.
Now I'm going to have to look him up.
No, he's great. And if you know Atlanta, if you know the city of Atlanta, you'll enjoy it even more. He's really a wonderful writer.
Yeah.
Amazing. Okay, we're going to go back to 1985. So this was my college years, but I moved to Atlanta in 1986 and lived there for 27 years. And I can say that you nailed the time period perfectly. From the music and the book's title to pop culture to political events. You go to George's Tavern in Virginia Highlands and the late lamented, as you just mentioned, Oxford 2 bookshop. I remember going to the Oxford bookshop for an Anne Rivers Siddons book signing back in the late 80s. Pat Conroy too. They all hung out. Yeah.
Oh yeah. If you came through and you were any author of note, you
went there.
It was in that old Buick dealership or whatever it was, and they had terrific events there.
Yeah, I have a picture of me with a copy of Every Crooked Nanny, my first book, at my very first book signing at the old Oxford Books.
It was a
It's
wonderful.
amazing.
I wish it was still there. It was
Yeah.
I don't know what finally happened to it, but it was a really wonderful independent bookstore in the South.
I mean, and I remember I was a nurse at the time, and none of my friends wanted to go to book signings. And I would go to them all by myself. That should have told you something. You mentioned Dante's Down the Hatch, which is where our parents, my husband and I, it's where our parents met for the first time at Dante's Down the Hatch, which is crazy. And you even mentioned Old Sarge military surplus and the Americana Hotel. So
where we never went.
No, we did not.
No, we did not go to the American.
No.
Old Sarge on Buford Highway was, as a kid, was an amazing place. It was a massive building. I think it's not there anymore. And you could go in, and they even had like Soviet products that were there, like, Soviet hats that they had gotten. I'm not sure how they even got them.
Helmets in there. Yeah.
Helmets and stuff from World War II. And it was also
gas masks. You could get a gas mask at Old Sarge.
You could get a gas mask. You could get anything. There's probably stuff we don't want to know about. It was probably sold in the back room. So that's sure. Of course, this is the place where Peter initially goes to find out a little bit more about this man that his mom is dating, trying to get some help.
So you've mentioned so much, from talking to your friend to living there, which is how you got it right. You were there during that time. What was your favorite part or the favorite memory of Atlanta in writing this book?
I'm writing a piece about this for Garden and Gun magazine. I have a lot of nostalgia for going to, this is going to sound crazy, but you guys will appreciate this, going to the malls during Christmas time, which I don't think people really do anymore.
The real Santa was at Phipps.
Oh, yeah. You got the fancy Santa. I think the Phipps guy's the only guy who had the real beard.
Yeah, exactly. It's so funny.
We would either go to Perimeter Mall, or we would go to most of the time, my mom really, boy, she loved Lenox Square. She'd go into, Neiman Marcus, and they would say, "Hello, Mrs. Atkins." So she was on a first name basis with those people. But a lot of memories of just going there, and it was just fun. It was part of the experience of the holidays, and not just consumerism, just buying for the sake of buying, but the mall was all lit up. It was beautiful, and there was music, and people seemed, for the most part, Mary Kate, you were covering stuff, so probably there were some stabbings that were happening here or whatever that I wasn't aware about. There was always crime in the city. But for the most part, it was just a fun part of being in Atlanta, being in the big city. I mean, and I was too young to experience like the old riches, but my sister did. My sister would have experienced a different Christmas, with going to the old riches and riding the downtown and the Pink Pig monorail system and all that stuff. But
so
anyway,
I bet it felt fun just infusing all of that into the plot. And then your 14-year-old gets to do it, and it's amazing.
Well, it's like, anytime we start a book or, series or whatever you're working on, is, for me, is really paying attention to the location, or really paying attention to the setting. And I've done books about 1930s Oklahoma. I've done books about 1920s San Francisco, and I really try to get to know it as a local. And I try to figure out, not just geographically on the map, but going to old newspapers, the culture and whatever. And for this, I didn't have to do any of that stuff, because this is all my childhood. This is all my teenage years. I knew everything in there. I had to double check some things, and it was a lot of fun to go back and read the AJC from the mid 80s. And boy, what a paper. I mean, the Sunday edition must have weighed 50 pounds.
Yeah.
And if you had to know anything, you had to go to the damn paper, and all of the coupons, and the riches section would be 100 pages. It would be like a novella, of crap, of just everything you could think of. But it really helped me a lot with the, also with the fashions and the time period and international news. But, book pages, we had book pages back then, and you had music and what was going on. And you really plugged into your community in the way that people are not anymore. People are so segmented, and what a shame that is.
Best-selling author Robert Cray said this book, Everybody Wants to Rule the World, is unlike anything the great Ace Atkins has written before, and an absolute blast. Would you agree with that? And what do you think? I mean, we've touched on this a little bit. Do you think that you're putting your lived experience in here? Is that what makes this book so different?
Well, I'm not going to argue with anything Robert Cray says.
No, who would?
That's absolutely brilliant and true. He's terrific. He's one of my all-time favorite writers. So that's very nice to hear. Yeah, no, I think it is. I think my last two books are very different from other books that I have written. I think that in the series books that I've done, both for the Robert Parker estate and continuing on Spencer, and writing these books featuring Quinn Colson that are set in Mississippi and North Mississippi and Memphis, they're very hero-driven stories. Even though I like to really develop all the characters and have a cast of characters that's interesting, and to write about the entire community where these people live. I like to write books where there's really no clear hero. I'm bored with the dude with the gun and the macho. He never really wrote that stuff, and I don't think Parker did either. I don't think that Spencer had a very very complicated character, a very interesting character. But I like to write about an ensemble cast, and I like to write characters. I like to write about interesting people like Dennis Hotchner and Peter and Hotchner's friend Jackie Demure, who worked the drag scene in Atlanta back in the 80s, which is, it was a huge deal. Midtown Atlanta, that was exploding. So those are the kind of people that I want to write about.
So you have written 32 novels, and we love talking about process on the show. So many of our viewers are writers, and they love knowing how everybody does it. And if there's one thing we've learned over almost 6 years of interviews, is if we lined every single one of us up, no two people have the same process. Yeah. So what is yours? Are you more of an outliner, or more of I have this germ of an idea and I was 14 and you just make a run for it? Or do you do two different things for the two different kinds of fiction you write, like the Parker estate and this one? What is your process?
I don't know about you guys, but every book is a new experience for me.
Begin again. Yep.
And I would have thought years ago that if I had published a certain number of books, that I could kind of put it on autopilot, and that there would be a process, there'd be a system for it. But unless you're writing pretty, boring, dry, robotic fiction, which obviously has a market these days. We see books being published like that already. But if you really care about what you're doing, you really care about your characters, and you care about your stories, they all have unique things. So my process on this book was different from the process before that. I think the main thing for me, the beginning of all of it, is excitement of the story. Like, yes, that's good. And I had 3 stories during the pandemic when I knew I didn't want to write Spencer anymore. I just only wanted to write my own stories. When I wanted to take a break from my Quinn Colson series, I wanted to just do something unique and different. I had 3 ideas, and one of them was Don't Let the Devil Ride, which is about a woman in Memphis whose life is upturned when her husband goes missing, and when she hires a guy I always had in mind this detective named Porter Hayes, and who had been around Memphis and had worked with Elvis, and he had this kind of encyclopedic knowledge of the city. I've just been thinking about it for years, and so I wanted to write that book. And then I wanted to write this book that was the fictionalized version of my childhood, and to write about Atlanta in the 80s and mid-80s, and write about the Soviet paranoia and what was happening in the city and the culture and Reagan's Star Wars program and all that stuff. So I'm fortunate I got to be able to do that. So that's the biggest thing, is excitement over the story. Like, I've got to write this. I'm not one of those writers that can write to the market. I really have a hard time with that. Like, this is working, this is working. I mean, look, guys, obviously we all know there's a lot better ways of making money than being a writer, right? I mean, there really is. I mean, it's an obsession.
That's all I know how to do, so I don't know.
I was going to say, I'm a one-trick pony over here. So yeah.
At this stage, I mean, this is what I've got. But I think getting excited about the story, but then really marinating in it, and getting, like, before I started writing this, I didn't just rely on my memories. I did go back and start reading on newspapers.com, 1985 Atlanta Constitution. And I would read it daily of how this thing, and I would read everything that was happening in this world. And, sometimes things I didn't remember. It wasn't like I was 14 years old reading the newspaper cover to cover anyway. I was probably just reading the comics. But then I bought old copies of Newsweek and Time and what was happening. And that's how I found out about the character Vitaly Yurchenko, who's a real figure, plays a major role in this book. And Vitaly Yurchenko was a defector high up at the KGB that defected and walked into the American embassy in Rome in 1985. Only to redefect to Russia 4 months later. So those things so I try to, the second part of the process is learn as much as you can about the world you're writing about. And then you start with storytelling. I don't research as I go unless I have to.
Do you outline?
I do outline. I do outline with the idea that can change. Okay. It's not an outline that I'm married to, but it is an outline that I have pretty good idea of what the story is.
A little bit of a scaffolding to hold you.
I do. Yeah. I mean, this and Everybody Wants to Rule the World, there was a major change that happened in my original overall idea for the story. And in the previous book, in Don't Let the Devil Ride, which is another international type book, several things changed for the better. That improved upon that book. But yeah, I don't think it's a good idea. Even, I know there's some, I think Raymond Chandler used to just sit down and be surprised every day for what he would write and what Marlowe would do. Robert Parker ended up doing the same thing. He never outlined. He just would sit down. In fact, I have his old keyboard at Parker's old keyboard.
Oh, you really? That's amazing.
His best friend, Mel Farman, who got to be a very good friend of mine, gave me his old keyboard. And Bob would just sit down with a cup of coffee in the morning and start writing. I could do some of that, but I can't do it long range. And I end up writing myself into corners. And especially with something like Everybody Wants to Rule the World, that, part of it's involving, politics that are happening at the time period. And, Ronald Reagan is actually a character in the book. And you got a 14-year-old kid, and you've got a drag queen, and then you've got Dennis Hotchner, this pulp writer. So there's a lot to keep up with. So not only just planning ahead, but just knowing what came before and just kind of keeping track of what you've done.
Right.
If you had one piece of writing advice, and we all have it, somebody comes up and says, "Can you help me get published?" And you're like, "I can't." But if I was to give you one piece of writing advice, what would you, Ace Atkins, give to somebody just starting out?
I think for younger people, if I'm meeting somebody in college or somebody who's going through a writing program or interested, is usually the question I ask them is, do you love books? Do you love books? And you would be shocked, mainly from older people, not usually from younger people. Usually the younger people go, "Yeah, I love books. I really want to be an author." But mainly from people that I write that are, my age or older or whatever, they're just like, "Hey, I'm going to write a novel. How hard can it be? Just a bunch of words on a page." And I ask them, who do you like to read? And 9 times out of 10, they say, "Well, I don't really read that much. I'm just really not into books." It's just crazy. It's like, I want to be a swimmer, but the water, I'm not so sure about it. I'm not really into it. So I know right then if somebody's serious. So my advice always is read all the time. Read everything. Read anything you get your head. Not fiction, nonfiction, whatever. And if you want to become a writer, that'll find your way. But that's your education. I mean, I didn't. I went to Auburn University, and then later I was fortunate enough to be a newspaper reporter. But I didn't go to an MFA program. That kind of stuff. My MFA program is back there. I've got James Lee Burke, I've got John D. McDonald, I've got Elmore Leonard. Those are the people that inspired me and taught me how to write.
Yeah. Ace, I went to Auburn for nursing, went to graduate school for pediatric nursing. And I always say, whatever my qualifications are, it's this: Patti, get your nose out of that book.
That's it.
That was it.
It really is it's really an obsession. And if you met me when I was 14 or 15 years old, I always had a book with me. And I had these kids in my class when I was in 8th grade. And there's a new James Bond movie coming out, which is A View to a Kill with Roger Moore. It's a terrible James Bond movie. But they were reading Ian Fleming. And one of the kids said, "Hey," they were like drug dealers. They're like, "Hey, you should try this, or do you like James Bond?" I say, "Yeah, I love James Bond." He said, "Well, books are so much better than the movies. You gotta try this." So I started reading Ian Fleming, and I just got hooked. And then it led to Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett and other spy writers like Lynn Dighton. And I just loved it. And if you don't really love it, then, you have to be obsessed with it. And it's so much fun. I do not understand people who don't read. And I think that I'll go on a small rant here really quickly, just for all of us, which is it's just startling the lack of the attention span that the average American adult has these days. They cannot put down their phone for just a few minutes and sit down and enjoy a book. I think it's great. I just think it's healthy. I think it's just good for your mind to turn off all the noise, and it's therapeutic for me to read a book, and it always has been, and it still is today.
Yeah, always will be. Yep.
We know you're a big music guy, Ace. Now, the stuff on the shelves behind you, are those CDs that we see?
Those are paperback books. Those
are paperbacks.
This is the entire John D. MacDonald collection.
Oh, wow.
Published.
Amazing.
Made dozens and dozens of everything, including, people may not know, a novelization of a forgotten Judy Garland movie. So John D. was a real work. So I even had that. I was fortunate. A good buddy of mine, when his father passed away, his father was the one who actually first turned me on to John D. MacDonald. He said, "I want you to have all my dad's collections." So I've got the original paperbacks, and so but these are all the books that really inspired me. I got Richard Price and Pete Dexter and my friend Megan Abbott over here, and Larry Brown, who lived in Oxford, and down here there's this hack named William Faulkner. He apparently did something years ago around here.
He wrote a couple. He wrote a few. Yeah.
Okay, but we're gonna talk about music now. So your previous novel, Let the Devil Ride, was of course steeped in the blues. This one is named for that iconic 1980s hit song, which now we cannot get out of our heads. Talk to us about how music influences your writing.
Music, you've done this before, Mary Kay. I can tell you've done interviews before.
A couple.
So, I mean, for me, it does start. I talk about the inspiration for a story or whatever. The music has always been core for me. I think when I really finally figured out how to write a book and how to get the tone right, the feeling was, I love blues music. And in Atlanta, I used to go to a bar called Blind Willie's, which I think is still there.
Yeah, that's still there on North Island.
Yeah, they used to bring in, national acts, and people like, Coco Taylor would be there and Junior Wells. And anyway, I just was in the 90s. I think they also 80s and 90s, they were really experiencing a big resurgence of the blues, where you had some of the forgotten musicians were getting their due and touring a lot. And of course, that was the roots of rock and roll. So when I was really inspired by blues and by Muddy Waters and Robert Johnson, Howlin' Wolf and all that stuff. At the same time, I'm listening to all that stuff. And at the time would have been cassettes or CDs. I also was reading Hammett and Chandler and Hard Boiled Bastards and John D. MacDonald, Ross MacDonald. And I realized there was so much of a connection between those worlds, because you listen to blues songs, it is a noir world. It is noir. It is hard edge. It is filled with violence and double crosses, and I just love the tone of it. And so that inspired my first novel, which was Crossroad Blues, which was really a melding of the music and the mood of a detective novel. But that continued on. So like if I was writing Devil's Garden, which is about the Fatty Arbuckle scandal in 1921 in San Francisco, first place I started with what kind of music was popular in 1921 America. And it turned out it was a lot of marches. A lot of people really, you'd think that the kind of the standard answer was like, oh, it's the beginning of the jazz age. And that's not necessarily true. It was a lot of these big marching stuff that was coming out of World War I. When I wrote Wicked City, which is about Phoenix City, Alabama in the 50s, which was the most vile crime-ridden town in America, I'm listening to Hank Williams and Ernest Tubb, and that sets the tone for me. And so I'm doing a lot of that, listening to that music as I'm outlining, as I'm writing, as I'm thinking about the story, and that it kind of comes out of it. And then for Everybody Wants to Rule the World, I mean, this is what was in my, remember the old tape deck holders where you have the cassette tapes?
Oh yeah.
This was my cassette tape stuff. It was Bryan Adams and Tina Turner and Duran Duran.
Years and yeah.
Prince and all that stuff. I mean, we all, if you were growing up in the 80s, MTV was massive. And so that's what we're tuning into.
Okay.
Remember when we made mixed tapes for each other? Not me and you. I mean, people in general.
I'm still waiting on mine.
I know, right?
Nobody ever made me a mixtape. I'm very sad about it. Okay, Ace, if you'll stick around, we have more to talk about to you. But first, a few quick reminders for our listeners and viewers out there.
All right. For all of you watching and listening, we encourage you right now, this very minute, to rush out and buy your copies of Everybody Wants to Rule the World. And if you do, I promise not to sing it. And the perfect place to do that is the Friends and Fiction shop on bookshop.org, where you not only get it at a discount, but all your purchases there support our show, Ace Atkins, and indie bookstores nationwide, which is why we started this show in the first place.
That's right. And don't forget to visit friendsandfiction.com for details on our show schedule, upcoming in-person events, and links to our merch store, our Substack newsletter sign up, and the award-winning Friends and Fiction official book club with Brenda and Lisa. Mark your calendars for Monday, December 15th at 7 p.m. Eastern, when they're going to welcome Jenny Colgan to discuss her new novel, The Secret Christmas Library.
And speaking of Substack, which I love, it's my new daily obsession to go in and read some of the great posts on there. But Friends and Fiction has a Substack, which is also a newsletter that you can get directly in your inbox. So if you upgrade to our paid Substack, which is only $5 a month, you get access to some really cool deeper dives, including one with Ace Atkins this week, plus occasional roundtable discussions like the recent ones that Meg did on debut novels and on crime fiction, sometimes in-depth interviews and features like the Q&As Kristin just did with Jamie Brenner and actress and children's book author Aria Mia Liberto. So if you enjoy tuning in for these weekly interviews, this is a huge way that you can support us for $1 a week. So check us out at friendsandfiction.substack.com. Okay, Ace, back to you. Can you tell us what you're working on, or is it a secret, or is it Memphis? Tell us.
I've been actually working on a few TV-related projects, so that's kind of taken my time over the last year. But also, I can't tell you about it. I'm sorry, but working on I've started a nonfiction story.
Oh, that's great.
So it's a story I've been really obsessed with for a long time. So for the last couple of months, I really missed doing the reporting and interviewing people. I missed the record searching. For me, it's a lot of fun. And it's one thing when you have, you're a detective doing it in a book, but it's another thing when you're doing it in real life. And so I've been on the trail of this incredible story that I've been working on for the last couple of months. So hopefully we'll see how that goes. And then Don't Let the Devil Ride is being developed as a TV show right now. And there's a wonderful showrunner that I've seen the script, and his name's Cheo Coker, who developed, he was a creator of a show called Luke Cage in the Marvel Universe. He also wrote one of the Creed films. He was a music journalist, and he wrote this pilot script, and it is terrific. And you don't always get a script from your work that really feels like the work. And so I feel very fortunate about that. So hopefully we'll have some more news on that very soon.
So many exciting things coming up. Okay.
All right. So
and we have a good secret, so we'll just wait.
Yeah. As soon as we're off, we're going to make you tell us what that project is.
I'll tell you.
We won't tell anybody.
That's
Ace,
okay.
Where can people catch up with you on the road? And will you be on book tour, and will you tell our community how to connect with you online?
Easy enough. I am at at aceatkins.com, and you can find all my tour information. I start off on December 2nd. I will be at Square Books here in Oxford, Mississippi, doing a launch party, which I believe maybe is today for our viewers. And then from then on, I will be in Orange County, California. I will be at the Poison Pen in Phoenix, and Murder by the Books in Houston, up to Mysterious Bookshop in New York. I'll be bouncing around quite a bit. Then back to Lemuria here in Jackson, Mississippi. But all that information is found at my website at aceatkins.com.
No Atlanta stops?
I'm sorry. Yes, no, it is Atlanta stop. Sorry. And that is, I can't forget the date. I'll have to check on the date on that, but I will be at the Cumberland location, which I always think about it as Cumberland Mall, but I guess it's the Cumberland.
Oh, so you'll be at what, the B&N, the Barnes and Noble at Cumberland?
Barnes and Noble Cumberland. I will be there, whatever that Friday is Saturday after the initial launch.
Perfect. We have a ton of Friends in Fiction members in the Atlanta area, so we'll shout out to all of them to come see you.
Well, please do. I'd love to see him.
Ace, what a delight. What a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for being on the Friends and Fiction show.
Thank you so much. I'm going to tell my wife what you said, that it was such a delight speaking to me, and that how
it was, and it is.
She will never believe it, but I will tell her.
Okay, everybody.
Give us a call. Yeah.
Yeah. Everybody be sure to tune in next week when Kristy and I are going to welcome Jackie Michard to discuss her new novel, The Birdwatcher. That show will air on the Friends in Fiction Facebook page and the YouTube channel on Wednesday, December 17th at 7 p.m. Eastern. And it will be published to our podcast for your listening pleasure on Friday, December 19th.
Thanks to all of you out there for being with us, and we will see you next time.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in. You can join us every week on Facebook or YouTube, where our live show airs on Wednesday nights at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Also, subscribe to our podcast and follow us on Instagram. We're so glad you're here.